Okay, Washington Irving also wrote a biography on someone, and this biography continued to be used for 100 years after it was written. Who was the biography written on? Written on Columbus. You should know that. You should know, and I gave these as bonus questions on a couple of the quizzes that you took. They may be bonus questions, they may not even show up on the test, but you should know that Gotham means goat town. Gotham is another name for New York City. And you should also know that the sketchbook, this is important, the sketchbook was published both in England and in America. And the reason why it was published in both places was because of the copyright laws, right? We talked about that there were no international copyright laws at the time. And so because of that, Washington Irving tried to circumvent the people that might try to steal his work. And so in order to do that, he published the sketchbook both in England and in America at the same time. This is the guy who got an honorary degree from which English fancy pants college? Oxford. We've been talking about the Astors a little bit, right? In your memoirs, we talked about John Jacob Astor, who put his wife on a lifeboat. And that was in the memoir that we read about the Titanic. John Jacob Astor is another guy that shows up again with Washington Irving. If you are on page 148, please look underneath Dean of American Letters please highlight honorary degree from Oxford, then squiggle down to he traveled west, writing of the picturesque prairies and of Astoria, the fur empire founded by John Jacob Astor. His fellow New Yorkers attempted to nominate him for mayor of New York City, but Irving declined. Okay, what I want you to get from that is that these guys are all interconnected, right? John Jacob Astor, Washington Irving, the stuff we're studying with the memoir that we read. John Jacob Astor is showing up with all of them. They all knew each other. So make sure that you know that name. The other thing specific that you need to highlight and know for the test, and I told you this the last time that we reviewed this, you need to know, again, that it's on that same page. Look down in the last paragraph. Irving's work marked a clear break in American literature. Its goal was no longer moral or religious instruction, but what? Entertainment. So please know that. Okay, flip over to the next page. And this is the stuff that we talked about with Rip Van Winkle, okay? These are the literary terms that you should know for the test, and we used these to talk about Rip Van Winkle. So a round character is someone who is complex, right? Underneath analyze, you should know the definitions that are given underneath there. So a round character is complex. A flat character is one with little individuality. Look down to sympathetic character, one with whom the reader identifies. An unsympathetic character, character for whom the reader cannot identify. A lot of times that's the person you dislike. So if we think back to Rip Van Winkle, think of a character that was a sympathetic character, somebody that you liked, somebody that you felt maybe compassion for, or you felt like you could relate to. And an unsympathetic character in Rip Van Winkle, again, somebody that maybe you didn't care for that much. Round character and flat character, again, think of Rip Van Winkle. A round character is someone that you know a lot of information about. You realize that they're a multifaceted character, right? We talked about how you guys are not just students. You are also, maybe you play basketball, maybe you do painting, maybe you are also a child of your parents. So you have many different aspects to you. A round character would be a character that the author tells you lots of different aspects about. Flat character is the opposite of that. So a flat character is somebody that you only know one part about, one facet about, one thing about. So think of the people that you can link those characteristics to from Rip Van Winkle. All right, going down to tracing the emphases of literary romanticism. You need to know the 4 emphases of literary romanticism. We have talked about them a million times at this point. So they are, and it's in that first sentence, it is individualism, imagination, nature, and the distant. And you own these books now, so you can highlight those. You need to know those. You also need to be able to, if in the test I put a paragraph in there and I ask you to highlight or underline a sentence or a couple of words that are examples of imagination or examples of nature or examples of the use of the distant or the use of individualism in that little paragraph, you need to be able to do that. So you should look back through your Rip Van Winkle notes. You should be able to remember where we talked about where nature was, like the descriptions of nature. You should be able to go back and remember where we talked about the individualism of Rip, the things that he did that separated him, right? We talked about he separated from the groups and he went off by himself. So you need to be able to pick those out if I ask you to. Imagination and the distant, right? Just the Rip Van Winkle, the entire end half of the story is an example of the distant, right? You should know the vocab in this box. You should know the vocab. You should know words and definitions if I ask you either way. So if I read a definition, you should be able to give me the word. If I ask you for the word, you should be able to give me the definition for it. And I may or may not ask you for a sentence. I haven't actually written the test yet. So once I'm done with this review, I am going to go and write the test. So just make sure that you know the vocab from page 149 up here in the box. All right, moving on. Flip over to page 172. William Cullen Bryant, and this is the stuff we most recently did, so hopefully it is fresh in your memory and we won't have to spend too much time here. But William Cullen Bryant, 172. You should know birth date, death date. They're right up here at the top. Highlight those. You should know the first sentence of that paragraph, the beginning paragraph. William Cullen Bryant was the first American poet to win international recognition. I asked you that on a quiz, or at least I asked some of you that on a quiz. You should know the name of the editorial staff, or the name of the paper that he joined the editorial staff for. You should know, remember we talked about the beginning of his life. His dad wanted him to be a doctor. He decided to go into law instead. He did practice law for a short period of time, and then he went to be on the editorial staff of what newspaper? The New York Evening Post. So you should know that. You should also know that 2 years later he became part owner and editor-in-chief of that same newspaper, and he kept that job for the rest of his life, until he died in his 80s. You should know when he died. I told you that already. You should know the name of the political party that he helped to organize. That would be the Republican Party. You can go down to the heading romantic poet. You should know this. And again, I asked at least a group of you this on a quiz. You should know that Bryant's romanticism was frequently compared to that of William Wordsworth, who is a very famous English poet. And so they are associating William Cullen Bryant who is American, with the English poet William Wordsworth. You should know that William Wordsworth literary themes, the themes that we find in his poetry, you should know that they are, and again, I think I asked you guys to highlight this already, but if you didn't, his themes tend to emphasize nature, death, and the past. And that's that sentence that goes over underneath his picture. His themes tend to emphasize nature, death, and the past. And like other romantics, and we talked about this at length, like other romantics, Bryant, again, underline, highlight, presents nature as a moral teacher, right? And we talked about that. This is something that we see in a lot of the romantic writers, that nature, remember, we shifted from the Puritan view, which is that God is our teacher, the Bible is our teacher. We can get moral and ethical guidance from reading the word. We've shifted from that to now it's a much more deistic Unitarian view, which is, you go to nature, and we saw that in Rip Van Winkle, you go to nature to commune with God or to commune with, with nature, and that's where you find your purpose, that's where you find your being, that's where you find your help and everything. So again, nature is the moral teacher, no longer God being the moral teacher. You should know when Thanatopsis was published, and again, there's some of this information is in that little box, the at a glance box. So you should know, again, when Thanatopsis was published. You should know how old he was when he first wrote Thanatopsis. Why am I asking you this all the time? Because the point is that you don't have to be an old person to have thoughts and to write them down. The point is that even as a young person, that you are able to produce things, as William Cullen Bryant did. You're able to produce things that matter to people, that speak to people. So he wrote this when he was 17. It was published in 1817. And we talked about New York Evening Post. We talked about the Republican Party. All right, flip over to page 173. 173, and this is the most recent thing that we talked about, and we didn't get to cover this like I wanted to because of homecoming week and things got a little messy. So I didn't get to cover this like I wanted to, but I will go over the things that you should know for the test. So at the top of page 173, you should know the bold words under analyze. So you should know enjambment. You should know the definition for that. You should be able to, if I give you a stanza of poetry, you should be able to highlight an enjambment in that, in those lines of poetry. You should be able to highlight or underline I always want to say Caesar. Caesura, you should be able to highlight a caesura, right? It's a break in the line of poetry with a mark of punctuation. And we talked about that with the very beginning of Thanatopsis, where there's a comma, I think, in the second line and a semicolon in the third line, right in the middle of the line. We talked about enjambment, which is where the author runs a thought from the first line down to the second line with no punctuation at the end of the line. We talked about an apostrophe. Apostrophe is when the author is speaking to an inanimate object, or maybe an animal, or a person that isn't present at the time. Maybe the person has passed away. That would be an example of apostrophe. And we also talked about symbol. And symbol is, and some of you wrote this on your quiz, the ones that I asked this question to, you put so for instance, a symbol for America is the bald eagle. It is a bald eagle, but it also represents America, represents freedom, freedom, represents those things for Americans. Obviously in poetry, we see a lot more symbolism. We see, and especially in Thanatopsis, there's a lot of things that symbolize death, that make us think of death, and they may be this one thing, but they're making us think of death, or they're making us think that nature is speaking by being a symbol of those things. So again, just like with Washington Irving, I should be able to give you a line of poetry or a stanza of poetry, and you should be able to pick these things out if I ask you to. Okay, still on page 173, under read, you should be able to tell me on the structure of Thanatopsis, you should be able to say that it follows the three-part pattern of the Puritan what? The Puritan sermon. And then you should be able to tell me the three parts of a Puritan sermon. And I know we just recently went over this, and so it should already be highlighted in your books. You should be able to tell me that the first part of a Puritan sermon would be doctrine. The second part of a Puritan sermon should be the grounds for the doctrine. And the third part of a Puritan sermon would be the application of that doctrine. And again, that's all in that first paragraph underneath read. You should know the specifics of those things that are tied to Thanatopsis. For instance, under doctrine, you should know that nature teaches man. In Thanatopsis, nature teaches man. That's the first chunk of Thanatopsis. The second chunk of Thanatopsis is the grounds for that doctrine. The grounds for that doctrine is that there are consolations that nature is offering to the listener of the poem about death, about why you should, trying to console you. That means trying to make you feel better about dying. And it's nature who is speaking. And the third section is the application of the doctrine, and in Thanatopsis specifically, it's how one should approach death in light of nature's teachings. So the third part of Thanatopsis is the approach, and nature is saying how you as a human being should approach death. All right, again, on page 173, vocab. We're going to have vocab on the test, just like the last test. You should know these 9 words and the 9 words from the last section. You should know them. You should know the word. You should know the definition, and you should be able to put them in a sentence if I ask you to. All right. And I think that just about covers it. So that is all for the review of the test that you're going to have tomorrow. I don't remember if I said it at the beginning of this video, but your sub should be able to give you the link for the YouTube video, so that if you want to go back tonight and rewatch this, or rewatch chunks of it, so that you know what to study specifically, or if I went too quickly or whatever, you should be able to go back and get that information for yourselves. You should remember to keep your essay so that you have that for Friday when I come back. And I think that is it. I think that covers everything. Hope you guys have a good day. Hope you are good children, and please don't cheat tomorrow on your test, or I will hunt you down. See you later, guys. Have a great day. Bye.